Acknowledges the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains, where most of our work is undertaken today. And most of our events are in Tanzania, which is, I guess, more recently known as Adelaide. However, as a place of meeting and collaboration and sharing of ideas that Tanzania has been for centuries and potentially millennia. We also acknowledge that there's a lot of neighboring First Nations, such as the Paramount people of the Mount Lofty Ranges, the Ngarrindjeri of the Fleurieu, Coorong and Lower Murray regions, and also the Ngadjuri and the Nukunu up toward Barossa and the mid-north as the traditional custodians of the land of the surrounding areas that we live, work, and thrive. And we pay our respects to all elders past and present. We also recognize the spirituality and connectedness of all First Nations and Aboriginal people to country, and of course their connection with countries of sky, land, water, and the stars. And we also recognize that this land has never been ceded and always will, and always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Thanks again. That was awesome. A lot of places in South Australia.
Indeed.
Yeah. So today we'll be having a chat with Trellis Technology, who provide a powerful carbon accounting and reporting software solution to organizations who are serious about emissions reductions, cost optimization, and staying ahead of their ESG legislative requirements. Trellis supports and enables collaboration between multiple business functions, including finance, procurement, and facility and asset management. Its insights have been helping over 15 organizations to achieve their environmental and financial sustainability goals. So with that, we're going to pass it on to the Trellis team.
Thank you, Christina and Ken. So I'm Pablo Smoley, I'm the CEO of Trellis Technologies, and with me I have Milad, who's our CTO, and Ryan, who's our commercial director. We are very local, South Australian owned, South Australian operated, based in Adelaide in Lot 14, in our company with close to 20 employees on a scale-up journey. And we've been around for a while, since 2008, rebranded from a previous name to Trellis Technologies. And all we do predominantly is a software provider. So we help businesses do carbon accounting and carbon reporting. If that tells you anything, I'm sure it does. But we cover scopes 1, 2, and 3 for more than 57 businesses around Australia and New Zealand. But that's not what we want to talk to you about today. We've prepared a brief presentation around putting carbon into ESG. Why is it important, and what do others do about carbon and ways to decarbonize? So we'll just kind of talk you through a couple of light touch pages and maybe just show you a dashboard, brief demo, what kind of technology is being used to carbon account in this space. So I'll hand over to Ryan to drive the.
Yes,
I'd like to say a couple of words.
I'll introduce myself first because Ryan's going to take it over after that. So I'm Milad Daka. I've just recently joined as CTO for Trellis, and my job is going to be to integrate some of the advancements in AI, machine learning, and data science to sort of try to level up the tool in terms of insights and analytics. And so that's my mission here.
I'm Ryan Waddington. I'm Commercial Director at Trellis. I really work across all the different teams and making sure that the business sort of operates essentially in harmony. So we're very keen to be able to present what we have for you today. We're going to start with sort of ESG 101. And as Pablo mentioned, we're really on that carbon sort of aspect of the ESG space. I'll go through a bit of a presentation to sort of set the scene of where we're at, just in terms of sustainability. And then I'll sort of segue a little bit into sort of our software and our place within this industry. All right, so jumping into this, let's have a look at this first page here. So this is really sort of almost the history of carbon within this space and recognised sort of globally. What this graph shows is fundamentally the increasing sort of amounts and concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The points that have been called out here, because we have sort of, I guess, as a human race, been taking carbon samplings of the atmosphere for a long time. Back in 1958, over in sort of Hawaii, that is where we first started measuring consistently what was happening in the carbon space. So since then, we have very good data in terms of how things are changing. And as you can see, after measurements started, it's probably a fair bit of time before there's a sort of serious concern about it. And by the time we get to sort of 1992, carbon is sort of very much up. In 1992, we have this summit in Rio de Janeiro, which really doesn't look at addressing, the C in ESG. It really looks at addressing sort of sustainable development goals, all the different aspects, sort of the holistic aspects of probably the entire space, including ways in which to drive development in a more sustainable way. But it's not as specific as perhaps it could be, or its later editions are. So by the time we come to the Kyoto Protocol in 2005, emissions are still climbing, and they're climbing much quicker than they have historically. That's essentially the commitment to reduce emissions by using, the sort of 1990s as a bit of a baseline era. And as sort of we all know, that's not really gone too well for us so far in terms of that comparison. In the meantime, the sort of regional group that did take advantage of, mandates coming out, or not mandates, but recommendations coming out of Kyoto, was the EU. They set up the emissions trading scheme, essentially putting a cap on carbon and making sure that that cap was essentially brought down year on year to try and sort of monetize carbon and provide financial incentives for reducing it. By the time we get to 2011, there's no surprise that this doesn't show up on a global scale, because this is the Clean Energy Act that Australia released. Now, we released that act. A big part of that act was the carbon tax, which obviously had a very tumultuous and short-lived period here. But it was, in essence, a similar measure to what Europe did. It just wasn't adopted very well here. Finally, we end up at the Paris Agreement in 2015, where really people are starting to, sort of sound the alarm. It's getting more specific in terms of what we need to do to, contain essentially the damage and limit global warming by under 2 degrees and ideally under 1.5. And as we sort of know, at the last year's sort of COP in Egypt, we are not really on track to, or certainly not on track to hit 1.5. So yeah, we're hoping to do well. Now you might notice that almost at the end of this timeline, it almost flattens out and then it dips. So that is potentially the one good thing that COVID did for us. It did show us that we can operate more sustainably, albeit with a lot of shutdowns. But it is the reason there is that blip there. We probably expect to see that spike back up next time sort of NOAA looks at putting together this graph again. So that's kind of a little bit of a kind of state of play within the area. Then we've got sort of this United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we've started very broad, then we're kind of looking at this, which is, kind of been significantly guided by that 1992 summit in Rio. Within this sort of framework, Trellis itself is very focused on providing information that supports a few of these, namely sort of 11 and 13. So we worked very hard to make the difference that we can, and we're really driven by that sort of sustainability mission at our core. But we also offer, other metrics to help reduce cost, consumption, and of course, energy, another significant piece that people in the carbon accounting space are starting to target a little bit more. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of the changes made by the ISSB, an international body, in terms of different frameworks coming into July this year. And the impact that has in terms of flowing through onto Australian businesses is quite significant. So within this table, what I'd like to draw your attention to is probably the bottom 2 rectangles of each group. So you've got this metrics and targets for scope 1 and 2, as well as 3. This is the first time we're sort of seeing 3 being, widely kind of mandated. And you can see that for businesses over 500 employees, really from next year, you're expected to have, sort of some idea of your scope 1 and 2 at a limited level, but it's very quickly turning into needing to have reasonable assurance. And that's where we've seen kind of a lot of people coming to us in terms of how do I systematize this? How do I make sure that I'm not greenwashing? How do I get something that's going to outlast any single employee and be a strong sort of measurement tool going into the future? We'll note this is put together by PwC, and it's a very helpful summary of essentially where we're at. And you can see that by the time we get to basically almost close to the end of this decade, everybody, no matter sort of what size, or if they're over 100 employees, will be needing to report with quite strong assurance. Now, you might be wondering why on earth we're looking at a marathon start line, probably in Europe, probably in the 80s. So I think there is great synergy between what we do and this picture. So the way I sort of see it is that we're all in this race to net zero. Whether we sort of know that we have started or not is a question in some cases, but we are in this race, and everybody is unique. We're different in terms of our business makeups, in terms of our opportunities, in terms of our locations, but we all want to get to the same place. We don't necessarily need to be the leaders of the pack, but we certainly don't want to be struggling at the back end and trying to catch up all the time. So technology's always played a role in pretty much everything that we've done. Back in the day here, we've got some impressive looking headbands and some shoes. There's also watches. Now, I am a runner myself. I do have a Garmin watch. It's basically a tool that tracks heart rate, speed, pace, how many breaths per minute, how well you're sleeping. And I'm sure if anyone has got a Garmin, a Sunto, Apple Watch, you've got all this data on your wrist now. So technology is transforming the way things happen. And back in the days of this running race, everyone got out there and gave it a really good go and then went home. Now we're really analyzing it and tracking things live. And basically what Trellis does is that for sustainability, so that you can sort of see live exactly how your business is tracking towards its goals. So with all that said, I am going to jump out of that one and bring up sort of Trellis for this sort of next 10 minutes and just show you what we do. Now, what we do is really try to automate this process. Once we get down to the nitty-gritty questions, should we do so around the tech, that will be Milad all across that. But what we aim to do is make this as easy as possible so that you don't necessarily need to spend all your time gathering data. We want you to spend time making reduction plans and moving forward constructively. So what you're looking at here, and I'm going to come into a really boring tab first. You'd never actually jump into this tab if you were a sort of user of the software. But what we're looking at is source data. So this source data is what we're picking up, and what we'll pick up is all your different financial invoicing, your water bills, electricity, gas, waste. Oh my gosh, we're seeing waste suppliers provide CSVs with all the different types. So we're picking up information on recycled plastics, hard plastics, not just a weight of the bin and how many times it was picked up. And the reason I show this page is because you can see that, if I come down to this water bill, you're picking up every line. You've got so many charges here that are actually unrelated to sustainability, but do represent an important piece of your cost profile. But you've got that potable water, sewage, so you can set targets against all these things. If it's electricity, we'll pick up what state your building's in, where it is, what grid it's using, what the emissions factors there are. And we do align with the NGA factors. We assist with the ENGA framework. We align fully with the Climate Active framework and many other frameworks that we support. Now, you might also ask, how on earth did this source data get here? Basically through sort of, many iterations of trial and error, we worked out how to get this here. It basically sits through an easy auto forwarding process that routes from an accounts payable inbox to a yourbusiness@trellis.com inbox, at which point it's sort of processed automatically, brought into Trellis and represented here. So it makes that a very easy way to do that. As I sort of come out of this, you'll see we have this bills section, where over on the right-hand side of this bills section, you've got the actual icon showing the bill. And the reason that this is important is in terms of creating a very clear and strong audit trail, you want to make sure that that source documentation always links to the emissions that you have in Trellis. Now I'll come back to the dashboard and give you a bit of an overview and understanding of the dashboard. We won't jump into reporting per se. But hopefully what you're looking at is actually quite user-friendly as it is. Hopefully it looks pretty self-explanatory. What you've got straight up is this year-on-year comparison here. You've got the ability to toggle through cost, energy, emissions, consumption. You can change those, you can see where they are. You can view this as a bar chart or a line chart, whatever you sort of like. You've got resource at the top. Now we're sitting on electricity, but if I open this up, we've got about 15 different things in here. If you were, looking for climate active accreditation as net zero, you might have 25 or 30 categories in here. Now, if I click on something like natural gas, you'll notice that the entire dashboard refreshes. We get different profiles. The completeness actually happens to be the same here, but it is being calculated differently based on just the gas bills. You've then got your summary data on the right-hand side. So we will pick up scope 1, 2, and 3 sort of associated with any resource use. And it really is a nice summary table. I actually see the dashboard as a very powerful place for just about anyone in the organization to jump into and sort of see how things are going. You then got your top facilities. So for a large multi-facility organization, you'll be able to see who are my biggest contributors in emissions based on gas. You've also got the ability to drill down by group. So you can organize your basically your inventory, which is what this is, into different groups. That might be states if you've got multiple buildings in different states. It might be departments. It might be buildings on a different site. It can be whatever you sort of would like to do. And finally, everything is mapped by either location on the bill or GIS coordinates. Now, I would like to show you one more thing. I'd like to show you kind of how you can zoom in and out of an organization to get a full idea. And what you've got here is a couple green flags. So if I click on one of those flags, this tells me it was a solar installation, and it tells me when, and I can click on a single line to get a comparison report. So if I open up this comparison report, what it's actually doing is it's creating a baseline comparison report, which is one of our tools, and it's just bringing up the data for that facility attached to that flag, sorry. So as you can see, this is the Paranable Convention Centre. It's in Portfolio A. We've got the meter associated. And in terms of cost, last year it was 110 grand. After this has been applied, the change is 25 grand. So it's a significant saving. You don't have to view this by cost. You can absolutely come in and view this by consumption, emissions. You can break it down by scope if you like, however you want to measure this project. And those projects are very easy to set up. You can just jump into the project tab, click new and create one. We can see here under solar, you have got this solar panel. You've got the capital cost, $100,000. Expected return on investment was 5 years. So 25K a year, we know we're a year ahead of schedule. Now, if I come back to the dashboard for a moment, what we've got here is those flags, and we know that this saved a significant amount of money as well as emissions, and yet it looks like it made absolutely no difference at all. And the reason that is because we're looking at this at an organizational perspective. So this is where we want to drill down through the structure that we have. So I can open this up. I could go to Portfolio A because we know where that things were. And what that opens up is now just Portfolio A's data. You can actually see the data is not quite as complete as the full inventory. So the system is automatically calculating that completeness based on the receipt of information. And if I then drill down further into this Paranable Convention Centre, which I can do from anywhere on the dashboard that's linked, we see the full impact of that project now. Makes a very significant difference. And as we come into summer, the sort of project on solar panels is most helpful, and it sort of drops off towards winter. We can see we have all the information related to this resource type for this building and the associated different scopes. So that's essentially how you do that kind of information. And then another thing I know that probably the Sustainability Building Network is interested in is probably interval data. So we can bring interval data in. If I open that up, what I would note is Trellis is not trying to be a real-time data monitoring system. What it is doing is bringing all the data you have into one place for decision making. So you could add a site, you've got your time of use by hour, by day, by month, which can be interesting to look at, but most people are going to come into this detailed analysis portion. And in this detailed analysis, you're going to see what you sort of would expect in an energy portal, essentially. And if I come down, I can turn off a couple of things. It's going to show you your consumption. Now we've grouped this by 30-minute interval data, so sort of peak demand overlays over that, and then you can bring in power factor. And as you'd imagine, you can drag and drop this interface. You can zoom out, you can zoom in. So if I want to know why on earth did we have peak demand spikes at this time, I can come in, I can say, look, what are we doing at Saturday, the 31st of December at 3 p.m? Why is this high? And we do see users using this information to reduce costs on a per building level and better manage their inventory. So I think that is a pretty solid overview of the software. So I'll probably hand it back to the ASBN team now, but it's been an absolute pleasure to share what we do and talk through this today. And we all collectively welcome your questions.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Ryan. That was very informative. So let's jump into some questions. I've got one. I'll just start it off. So the integrated data, is that something that someone has to physically put in, or is that somehow connected to kind of like your accounting software? And then on top of that, if it is, what's the like IT security around that? Because I'm sure people will have worries about getting hacked and these kinds of things.
Yeah, of course, I can answer those questions. In terms of this sort of interval data and how we get that in there, we're lucky, particularly in the state of SA, that SAPN, our sort of network provider, has that information sort of for everyone going through the network. So what we actually get is everyone that is using that service basically sends us a file from SAPN. So it is something that they either download or they set up an automated export to email to the machine learning monitored inbox for them. So in that way, it's sort of semi-automated or automated after setup. We receive that file monthly for most people because that's when they have the time to sit down and do the analysis. Other people are keen to get that at a daily resolution. So it's just a matter of how often people want to send those pieces of information through. There's a two-part question there, and I've lost the second part of it. Security. So we are tracking towards ISO 27001. We've never had any issues with data privacy, but we do take it very seriously, and we do sort of operate through a lot of the mechanisms and frameworks of data receipt that we do to ensure that everything is pretty contained and secure.
So we use the Amazon Web Services Cloud, 256 bits encryption. So it's fully contained within Australia on Australian servers based in Sydney, and the highest level of encryption that you can get. So yeah, it's pretty secure.
And I'm guessing that being in the Lot 14 ecosystem, you guys are interacting with a lot of data security.
Yeah, we are.
To be able to give really good information in that hub. So Anna has asked two different questions. And the first, more poignant one is around how is the Scope 3 emissions working, especially Scope 3 emissions calculated? As you said, it's sort of a developing sort of space. And she's also asked, she represents a small organization, which is less than 50 employees over 2 sites. So would Trellis be a suitable platform for their business? And could you also talk about costs?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, in terms of, I'll start with Scope 3s. So that's a good pickup. Obviously, that's been a challenge in this space for a long time. So there are a lot of creative people out there doing very impressive things. However, it is often tracking ahead of the frameworks. And our job is really to align with the frameworks to ensure that anybody using the platform is not going to get themselves in trouble. So what we do with Scope 3 emissions, basically we have all the different factors that are related to Scope 3 to climate active so that you can fully align with that. You would have seen in the drop-down menu when I presented Trellis, there was food and pieces like that. Now, there is a bit of a process to this. So what we would do is we do use the dollar-based spend figure that you would have normally on an annual basis, but we could do it at different intervals for a particular category. And I've had some people come back and say things like, oh my gosh, I don't know that information, it's very broad. And the reality is we're all on this journey of refining data as we go. And the frameworks are actually very forgiving in terms of that. They're very understanding. So let's take food for an example. If you had a detailed sort of general ledger or other financial account that said we spent this much on meat, this much on alcohol, this much on vegetables, then we can provide the factor for that and get you a very accurate number. If you can only say, I spent this much money on food, then that's fine. There is a factor that can be applied that's accredited, but it would be at a slightly higher level. So it's a more conservative estimate and you'll pay a slight carbon penalty for that. I think probably more importantly is how does that information get in there? So what we do is we kind of work often with someone from finance or sustainability, depending on skill sets, and we sort of issue them with basically a template that links to those factors. And it's a matter of having a look at sort of standard general ledger and saying, right, how do we map this back? We came from a consultancy background, so we're able to help with that sort of mapping and placement of those things. And once that's done, it's very easy to sort of remap that over time if you want to upload it quarterly or so forth and get that into Trellis. It is simply sent to either your automated inbox or our customer success team who upload that information, and we bring that into Trellis. And we do see businesses, taking this sustainability journey outside of sustainable stuff for the first time, saying to finance, look, when these things come in, what you need to do is tag them in this way because it equates to emissions. And if we don't tag it that way, we're going to pay a penalty in terms of our carbon footprint because of that. So it's a educational sort of process as much as anything else. That is how we currently account for Scope 3, and that's how we make it as sort of low touch as possible for those trying to maintain that information. And please do feel free to drop more questions on that in the chat as you go, because I would love to address it if that wasn't clear. In terms of that second part, in terms of small organisation, less than 50 employees over 2 sites, I'm going to be super honest. There are other sort of software programs out there that might plug into your finance and, add sort of a number based on a dollar spend target at a very high level. Now, sort of this bunch of research papers done on that, our data scientists have looked into this. Going that direction can overestimate your footprint by sort of 5 to 7 times, depending on the actual emission source and the factor. It is very broad, but it is easy to do. What we really like to be able to offer is surety, the ability to track and plan projects. So I'm less worried about your number of sites, but maybe it's the number of details. So, or the detail that you want. Also our alignment and detail of factors sort of is very much green proofing you, if you like, against any potential claims. So it's probably organisational dependent. We are often picked up by larger organisations, but we work with plenty of single site organisations. If you think about, within SA, the Green Industries SA, the Environmental EPA, the SA Motorsport Board. So they're all single business units that we work with, just one building or one floor of a building. On the other end of the scale, we work with the Department for Education, which has got 950 schools across the state. And I'd say the use cases are probably different. The Department for Education is seeking to understand a full footprint. The EPA is looking to make sure that they have very accurate data and that there's never going to be any issues or troubles, as well as just not having the time or the ability to hire a dedicated sustainability person.
And if it makes any difference, as again, I was used earlier versions of Trellis, and that was for an organization with only 4 employees at the time. So
thank you, Ken. That's helpful.
Thank you. Excellent. My question was, it appears to me that it's obviously a software for managing for site management, I guess. What about a construction project? Is it used in that capacity, or could it be used in calculating or managing sustainability in an actual construction project?
That's an interesting point. So I would say that is a out of the box way to use this sort of software. We're actually talking to a couple of construction companies at the moment in terms of basically piloting that to see how it goes. I've also had inquiries from like National Institutes of Dramatic Arts that are looking to basically track performance specific data. I think in terms of construction projects and things like that, what we would typically do is set up a sort of separate inventory. So you've got the inventory that might be your business, that's what most people will have, and everything will flow from under that. If you had a project, you might have a separate inventory for that, so that you can bring in the information just related to that and make sure that that's in there. But we do generally specialize in the entire corporate footprint, but we're always more than happy to engage in conversations. We've really developed our tool to meet the need of, first and foremost, the South Australian sort of business network that we sort of started and grew with, and we continue to design the product around the needs of tomorrow. So all that feedback is super useful. Thanks, Sam.
How often is the supplier info updated, and do you think the Australian suppliers are catching up to the increased interest of the built environment on this kind of tools? And also, do you see a push from suppliers and designers?
I mean, look, in terms of this particular question, supplier info essentially updates without needing it to. So for example, when we pick up a bill, we know exactly who the supplier is. So you can come into the system, you can search by AGL, you can search by origin, you can search by SA Water or whatever you want to bring up the related things. If you essentially change your supplier, that will simply show in the software as basically the end of that meter. You'll go and mark that. It will open a new one without you having to do anything, and you will simply continue to track the data from there. So that information is sort of updated. The factor sets that we use basically would govern all suppliers, and this is where if you came to us with a bespoke factor because you were using a specific supplier for a green product, we could certainly look at that. Basically what we'd ask is if they do believe they've got a green product, we'd love to see some sort of documentation around what that emissions calculation would be, and we can input that and make sure when those bills are received, it sort of routes into the system applying that factor. But we would say, just from an auditability point, that you might be starting to get ahead of the frameworks and need to justify that later on. In terms of the second part of that question about you're sort of seeing more of a push from some sort of suppliers or interest in the built environment, I'd almost say not quite yet. People are thinking about this space, but it is still really something that everyone thinks is a couple of years away. But I think the ASB legislation is certainly changing things. We're involved in an article in the Australian Financial Review a little bit earlier. They came to one of our clients and sort of said, how does this change things? And they were nice enough to mention us. So I do think that there is increased pressure in this. But I think suppliers themselves, there's still very limited sort of green options if we're looking at that exact product space. So I'm not seeing, or we're not feeling too much of that push, not to say it might not be happening.
But I guess overall, is suppliers, like for instance, if built environment or product suppliers, if they're going to be improving their reporting through their like their own products or their own EPDs, then having software like Trellis, if they don't already have software like Trellis that can potentially automate their own manufacturing emissions and things like that, then that's kind of like an opportunity to once again just like automate those sort of inputs so they can actually have verified inputs that go into EPDs. EPDs are environmental product declarations, and those are what built environment professionals, both in design and construction, really need to help benchmark what is the life cycle impacts and upfront carbon impacts on the projects that we design and create.
Perfect. Yeah, I think probably the flip side, or maybe not the flip side of that, but what we sort of actually see and get feedback on is more market access issues. So, and there's a couple pushes on that. There is your product carbon neutral in terms of supplying to a big supplier? Often we actually see that in the ag space. The other one that sort of comes up is the parent company overseas is saying, what on earth is your Australian operations doing? What's your footprint? And that starts tapping into sort of international export market access, which is also relevant for a number of our clients.
What has been an interesting revelation from some of your clients by being able to see their data?
Yeah, look, there's all sorts of different pieces. Look, I think people get very excited about cost. So there is a team within South Australia that is a dedicated utilities optimization team. Now, thankfully reducing cost often goes hand in hand with reducing emissions. But that utilities optimization team actually sits across 3 different councils that we work with. And anecdotally, they sort of told us that using the software, they were able to find $1.5 million in cost savings. Now, I will say that is really fantastic work that they do. They are absolute experts in their space and they are full-time resources on this project. However, Trellis is the tool that they use, and it is the tool that they sort of even in job advertisements request experience with. So that's kind of the bigger end of town. On the smaller end of town, we see, or maybe mid-level, we've seen one of the universities we work with have a overflow valve failure on their new swimming pool. And basically they were just pumping water straight in and then straight out to sewerage. And they got their bill. Trellis gave them an anomaly report based on the fact that it was very different to sort of, any previous billing. And they went and investigated that. It all looked fine, but based on the size of the anomaly called out by Trellis, they investigated further, found that was the issue. And that was something that would have, if you extrapolated it out to a quarter for their quarterly billing cycle, been flushing away close to 60 grand a quarter. So that was very significant for them. We also have had people on the cost saving side simply had bills. Occasionally they're wrong, not always, but when they are wrong, it is very helpful. And while you may get that money back in the future anyway, it's very helpful to not have to be out of pocket sort of straight up. And we have seen that up to the tens of thousands of dollars just being wrong. I think in terms of other insights and pieces, what we most see is probably two things. On the interval data side, people are using it to reduce their peak demand charges, basically by looking building by building, going through the energy team and working to minimize any costs there. The other piece that we see is people looking for basically meters that they're paying for but have no consumption, might identify a problem with the meter, might identify the fact that they really just should turn that off and pay a charge to turn it on every now and again.
Well, I think there's a famous example that we have. We work with one ASX listed company that's a retailer, and because they have so many stores, they're able to do benchmarking on the store by store example. And what they did was they have some fridges without doors, and other shops have fridges with the doors. And they've asked us to put key flags on the system to compare those stores like for like on the square meters or square footage. And they identified that fridges without doors consume vastly more energy per shop than the ones with the doors, and the difference has been stark. And that's a takeaway, that there is a way to save costs by having doors and fridges across all of the stores, because we could evidence-based show what will be the saving in terms of cost, the consumption data of kilowatts per hour, but also the emissions that are being saved. So some things are relatively quick, easy wins, as long as you see it in the data and you start to realize that actually I could save a lot of money by doing something really simple. But probably the last example I'll mention, one of our other clients have had a number of offices, and they saw that one of the offices was consuming way more electricity than some of the other similar offices. And they've asked us to have a look at the data. So we did using our graphs, and they've identified that there was an air conditioning system running 24 hours a day, including weekends, and no one bothered to turn it off. And there was 40–50% increase on consumption in that place. So very easy to see it by demand, and then an easy win. You shut off your electricity after 5 or 6. Shut off your air conditioning after 5 or 6, and you make sure it doesn't run on the weekend, and you have an enormous saving in your cost and consumption and emissions data. There's many other use cases. And we tend to say that the first, if you think of your entire cost base, the first 1/3 of the cost base can be reduced profitably and also do good for the environment. The second third of that cost base, if you do something with it and put some interventions in place, it could be cost neutral or profit neutral. You put some intervention in place in terms of wall insulations and other upgrades, that's costing you money, but you're also saving on costs, and then you're also reducing your emissions. It's this last third of your cost base that's very, very difficult to tackle in terms of emission reductions. And this is the piece that many organizations choose to offset on the derivatives market, because it's incredibly hard to do something about this, or the cost investment is disproportionate to the benefits to the business.
You brought up kind of the project that sort of that ASX client is tracking. Projects is the other piece, and the reason I think it's important to mention is many of you might be in an organization where you're the only sustainability person and it's kind of an uphill battle. And projects are just a really good way within the software to say, this is the difference we're making. So it builds internal business cases, helps get funding for sustainability. It shows the impact that you're making. And as soon as you get like finance teams starting to get excited about these things, suddenly you have power and influence. So that's a more circuitous sort of way that it's being used in terms of the data.
I'll probably just mention also, I used to work for Big Four accountancy firms in the past, and I was an advisor for many of the boards and senior directors. And the key message I got, if you can't clearly show the cost benefit for a particular project, that project will never get funded. No matter how cool and sexy it is, that it's an amazing user experience, great for our employees, great for our staff and clients, nice, beautiful visuals. The question will always be, what is the bottom line impact? Are we in the medium or longer term going to realize some sort of financial benefit to the business? Yes, there are other benefits. There's environmental benefits and other benefits, and those are really important and they get traction. But the bottom line is board makes decision on the cost impact and the wider benefits for the business, one of which is the cost. And so what this software does really beautifully is those project flags that you've seen. We're showing the payback period. Yeah, you wanted the wall insulation upgrade? Great. How much is it going to cost? Okay, 100 grand. Great. Let's put it into the software. We've just implemented it. We know it costed us 100 grand. Let's track. Let's see what's the payback of that is. Because we have electricity, utility bills, we could see. And then you're seeing, oh my God, I'm saving 20 grand a year by consuming less electricity. And then on top of that, I'm saving another couple of 100 tons of emissions. And then that's a beautiful story that finance and sustainability people love to show to the board members. Month on month, quarter on quarter, year on year, how are we realizing that CapEx investment? So this is where sustainability and finance merge together, and they're showing one and the same source of truth, using reliable data that's also audit traceable, right? So auditors love us because we show everything down to an invoice, all the way up, all the way down. So you can drill down to the lowest level of denominator and you can roll it up to the entire organization. So that's the beauty of the product. It transcends finance and sustainability. And that's what our board members love, the businesses we work with.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in this space where we can, whether we're working in sustainability or not, help articulate that in a very, very good fashion. I think we had an incredible yarn, and thank you so much for such a great presentation, as well as giving us some insight on like the reasons why this is really important to track a lot of this data.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Christina and Ken, for inviting us. It was a pleasure to speak to you all. We'll share some light touch materials afterwards for sharing with you guys who managed to attend.
Steve's Trellis team, and thank you everyone else.
Yeah, thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of the day.